So welcome to the AT Construction Podcast, and we're very fortunate today to have Jim Spurlino with us today. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, Brad.
So Jim was actually referred to us. Dan with Devo Builders recommended to bring you on, and Dan is a good friend of mine. But more importantly, he had mentioned that Jim has so much to offer. Jim is he has a book that was just released this week, which is super exciting. It's the Business Bullseye: Take Dead Aim and Achieve Great Success, which we'll dive into. And Jim has incredible success building companies, the entrepreneurship side, and as well as just everything you've done throughout your career, from the entrepreneur mentality, which is super important. So I want to start with this, what inspires an entrepreneur?
I know for me, it's the possibilities. It's what could be. It's the challenges, the potential, and particularly the chance to be the best. And that's what always drove not just me, but my company.
And do you feel that, this was inherent in you? Because I know that you worked for a firm for quite some time, and we're going to dive into the specifics of that. And then you had felt, okay, now it's time to move off on my own. So was this something you always wanted to do, or it just kind of fell into place?
I started at this company that I worked for when I was in college, and it was a job, basically to pay for college. And I got my undergraduate degree, and then I got my MBA. And I stayed there for 15 years. I was at the end vice president and general manager, and I'd risen up pretty quick, and had always been maybe a little bit of an overachiever. Was involved in athletics and so forth throughout school, and that I think creates a little bit of a competitive drive. But for the most part, there was more I wanted to do in my industry and with my career than I was being allowed from my employer at the time, and I knew there was so much more we could do, and that just led me to start looking at running my own company. And honestly, for the last few years I was there, I tried to buy the company from the owner, and he just wasn't interested. And so in the end, I said, okay, that's fine. I'm going to go try this on my own.
So it's interesting. I mean, you come from the concrete background, which we'll get into, from the manufacturing side, but as far as your career, did you grow up in construction? Did you have a plan to go down that road? When you were in school doing your bachelor's degree and then getting your MBA, did you have plans to maybe go a different direction, or did it just come in line with, hey, I'm working here for this company. There's a lot of opportunity. It's going well. I'm learning a lot, and I feel like I can apply this schooling into my current career.
Well, I didn't always want to be in the concrete business. I don't know how you grow up to want to do that. But what happened was in college, construction was the best paying jobs. And I started out in highway construction. Honestly, my first job was running a jackhammer on an interstate highway. And I liked that, and got to grow into some positions in that company. And it was just a great paying job at the time. And so for the most part, I was just trying to earn as the best wages I could. And then once I got my degrees, I was in a company and had started to move up. And to be honest, in our industry, in the construction materials industry, I don't know that we attract the best and the brightest. You don't find a bunch of Harvard and Yale grads clamoring for jobs in construction. And so, if you have drive, if you have a good work ethic, if you're, reasonably bright, probably in that order, you've got lots of potential. And that's what I found. I was happy to have all the opportunities to keep growing in the company, keep getting more responsibility, and having more impact on their success. So that it really wasn't a conscious decision as much as there's opportunities in front of me, and I knew I wanted to run something and eventually run a company. So that was the path that just presented itself.
Well, I think what's interesting, I mean, you work for a company, so you gain a lot of experience to the ins and out, whether it be purchasing or estimating, the coordination that happens in, especially with where you're at, where you're supplying concrete, right, to the field. And so there's a lot of coordination from managing the trucks and traffic and all the inconsistencies that come up on a day-to-day basis. But most MBAs that I speak to, or most people that have received that MBA in finance, it seems that there is more of an entrepreneurship mentality, whether that's instilled in them naturally or going to school, that the program's typically catered to be an entrepreneur. And it's almost hand in hand where now, Jim, you had the know-how because you worked for a company, and then now you have, the experience as far as doing your MBA, so you can put these two together. Which, do you feel that gave you an advantage now when you left to start your own firm?
Well, I do. And something a friend of mine had always told me, he looked for in people, and this is a guy that runs a large construction company. He said he always looked for people that had dual degrees. And he was talking about a college degree and a degree basically out in the field of hard knocks. And I think there's a great advantage to that. I think that there's probably actually a lot of MBAs that think, I've got my MBA, I'm going to go to work for a bank or Goldman Sachs, or have a great career in finance. But I think that there's also a huge amount of potential and opportunities out there to take, that degree in hard knocks, where you're actually learning a business, learning an industry, as well as combined with your academic background. And I talk about in my book the three legs of a stool that are important to anybody's success. It's having that academic degree. It's having that foundation there. It's having the knowledge about an industry, and it's having the knowledge about your company and what it can do and what it can't do. And those three things combined are so important. And the reason I call them the three legs of a stool, because just like any three-legged stool, you lose one and it's going to fall over.
Yeah, I love that analogy. When I read your book, that was one of the items that stuck out, right? Because those three pillars are so important. You take one out and the stool will fall down, which is key to business. I mean, that's key to being successful. And, I know when you and I were speaking just about business in general and entrepreneurship, one of the things you mentioned is you said, hey, Brad, when I went off on my own, one of the things I attribute to our rapid growth is that we were willing to take on challenges that our competitors were not, right? We're willing to look at ways to go into areas and target markets that our competitors just didn't want to do it, that they didn't want to come up with a solution. So describe, I guess, where that mentality came from and how you achieved, just your strategy to come in and build, a plant in one day, and be up and operating right away.
Yeah, and it's probably similar to how I got into the concrete industry. Even I don't want to make everything that I was good or successful at sound like I stumbled into it, but it was almost one of those things where when you start a business, and we started a business from scratch. We didn't buy somebody. We started with no customers, no sales, no employees, and we bought a bunch of plants and a bunch of trucks. So it was kind of a burden in that aspect. But what it did was it made us all hungry. I mean, we had to go out and get that first sale, and then we had to get all the sales after that. And when you're kind of in that position, when a customer comes to you or an owner comes to you and says, hey, I want to do this, and you see the competitors around saying, we don't do that. That's not what we do. Or that's, we don't work on Sundays, or we don't work in the middle of the night. Or, we had a concrete pour, you would appreciate this, Brad, that went 10 straight days, 24 hours a day. and there's a ton of companies that said, we don't do that. We operate one shift a day. We don't, how could you do that? How could you do 24 hours a day, let alone for 10 days straight? It was a continuous pour. It was silos that were going straight up in the air that were being slip formed, and you had to have concrete there every
continuously.
And those are the kind of things where, in the beginning it was, we needed work. But then as time went on, we saw this as a significant part of our business, because it was really one of those things where our competitors weren't, and frankly, outsized profit margins existed. And we just had to be willing to do it, had to figure out a way to do it. And, I don't want to say it's classic kind of just making sure you think out of the box sometimes, but it's being open and willing to do those kind of things. And it could be very lucrative if you are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to dive into that aspect of thinking outside the box of what you've done, but I think it's really important for the listeners, for those that aren't as savvy, I should say, with the construction industry or with concrete specifically, you say it as if, hey, we had competitors that weren't willing to come in and do a 10 straight day, 24 hours a day, but there is some tremendous complexity, and there's a reason why your competitors would not. So explain a little bit, for someone, if you're educating them on the concrete industry as a supplier, just what that entails, that you're delivering a truck, maybe every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, every hour, whatever it may be. and the shelf life of that product on the truck and how it's mixed in the plant and how it gets there, and then it's poured, and then you have the install crew that's there going through these silos, but explain just the complexity to do that even for a straight 8 hours, yet alone 10 days.
Sure. I mean, it kind of starts with, companies like ours, any manufacturer, you're set up with a workforce that is, almost always very typically one shift per day, 5 or 6 days a week. And that's what you're set up for. And so to try and figure out the second and third shift is a lot of complexity, because you've got people that are fairly specialized in our industry, like they are in a lot of industries, whether they're running a plant or a piece of equipment or doing quality control or receiving materials, raw materials that are coming in. All those things, require some extra planning, when all of a sudden you're essentially tripling the size of the company for 10 days, just for 10 days. And then you go back to normal. So it's a it's a complex amount of planning that goes on, but it also takes the people, wanting and willing to do that. It takes, the folks that we had were always interested in that challenge. I think it became almost, if we didn't have something interesting or challenging for them coming up in the year or the months ahead, they weren't as happy. They weren't maybe as motivated or thrilled to go to work. We just got to do our normal job. We don't get to do something, super hard today. But the alternative side too, just that happens with concrete, is concrete's a perishable product. You essentially, concrete's made with cement, which is a powder, and aggregate and water and some chemicals. But what happens to make concrete go from soft to hard is that water and the cement combine, and there's a chemical reaction. And there's a limited amount of time before that chemical reaction causes the concrete to get hard. It's about 90 minutes. 90 minutes from the time the water hits the cement at the plant. And so then this truck has to drive out into traffic and encounter, what it encounters, what we all encounter every day driving, right? No matter what you think you plan, you hit a bottleneck. There's a wreck on the highway. Equipment breaks down. Brad, I know you're a contractor. I don't mean to pick on contractors. Contractors change their minds.
Yeah.
I don't want concrete at 2, and now I want it at 4. Or the inspector didn't pass my footers. I don't want that now. And there's all those complexities. I always compare the ready mix concrete business to air traffic control. So you think about it, at the beginning of the day at 4 a.m, a guy is sitting in a tower, air traffic control, and it's perfectly planned. He knows where every plane's going to go, when it takes off, when it lands, what the next destination is. It's perfectly planned out. And the first plane takes off and everything goes to hell. And, it's just, then all of a sudden you're just living, at the moment and trying to move stuff around. So, people get where they want to get, or concrete gets where it's supposed to get, and it gets there safely, and it gets there, in a quality manner. And, we're not putting lives, at stake, other than our drivers and everybody else on the highway, particularly, but we're not flying people. But the product's perishable, and the product will die in 90 minutes. So you got to fight that. So it's an interesting business.
Yeah, and I love that analogy, because you think about, especially now, not only do you have weather and other issues there, traffic control, but maybe someone doesn't want to put their mask on the plane, right? And so it gets delayed and people have to get off. And so now you're creating all these issues in other cities and, all the chaos that comes. And it's very similar to your business. And I love that you explain it that way, to say, concrete dies. It has a shelf life. I mean, it's going to die in 90 minutes. And so that's why it's really important to think about just the complexity of running your business, is that a lot of people think, okay, I own a concrete plant and a manufacturer and I'm supplying this, but the complexity of dealing with all the unforeseen circumstances. And now you have a client that comes in and says, okay, Jim, we need a continuous pour for 10 days, 24-hour shifts. The amount of complexity, because the contractor that they're using, they're going to dictate what times each pour has to be there, each truck, and you have to hit that in a 24-hour span. And that's why I think it's important to give a little background. And just, you're tripling the size of your business for 10 days, as you mentioned. So how do you motivate your team or help them see the vision where they're normally maybe an 8 to 5? I mean, I just use that term generally, but you have people that show up, they're there for the day. They work really hard. But how do you create that incentive to say, okay, well, now you need to work the night shift or the early morning and to help us achieve this goal?
Yeah, and I think, our company really was a lot like most companies. We probably, had 80% of our employees were kind of all cut from the same cloth. And then we had another 20% that we were always either working on or probably working to get rid of and turnover, frankly. And but it really came down to, the type of people we hired, but also the type of company we were and the way we talked about how we do things and the culture that existed in the company. And like I said, we had a bunch of employees that thrived on that. And it was almost like that was something that motivated them to always achieve something more. Then when we went back to our normal business, almost, creates an additional amount of talent out there that is doing even a better job at our normal business because they know they can do much more. They know that they can achieve some of the tougher challenges in our industry. And yeah, we will absolutely kill it in our normal business. And it's really cool to see that. It's really cool to see, employees that come together as a team like that and want those challenges put in front of them. So.
Well, it's interesting because you can see that I think most companies that have built success, such as you have, Jim, is they have an ability to show that vision to their people, right? Whether they believe in what they're doing or the product or the challenge ahead. And as they conquer that, that confidence and expertise now turns, into performance on a regular basis. And going back to when you started, so, the background that we were speaking of, you had worked for a firm, you had the education, you had the know-how, tried to acquire the company. It didn't work with the existing owner. So you go to start your own. Now here you are trying to start a plant, right? You're starting your own plant, which, there's going to be land, there's going to be materials, there's a lot of costs involved. There's, the overhead of any company, so how, without getting into the exact specifics, but the finance behind it, the cash behind it, those sales, I mean, there's going to be a window there in construction where it takes time to start building that, I don't want to say bank account, but at least that lead generation, right? For projects to turn into fruition. So, talk about that stress, or at least how did you overcome the finance part of it to start a new venture?
The stress part was crazy. Literally, I don't mind sharing some of the numbers. We started with 3 brand new concrete plants and 45 brand new concrete trucks.
So from day one, you had 3 plants, 45 trucks,
brand new, no business, no sales.
And did you go personal investors? Did you go, through a bank? I mean, how did you work the investment, the cost side of that?
So it was at the time when I first started talking about doing this is the very end of 1999. And some of us are old enough to remember back then. So this was the beginning of 2000. The economy had been great for years. Frankly, people thought it would never not go up every year, year after year. And banks were willing to lend money back then. And I joke with bankers today. I was like, you'd never let me do what I did back in 2000 today. You wouldn't even think about it. And so it was a different time. I had been at my previous employer for 15 years. I handled all the banking relationships, so I knew those guys, and they knew me. And I was starting my business in the markets that I had already been operating in for 15 years. So they knew, the customers knew me. And, the last thing I really wanted to do was name my company after myself, Spurlino Materials, but that's what I did, as brilliant as that sounds. But it was because I'd been there for 15 years. I'd been in that market and people knew me. So it really was kind of the logical thing to do. But that, the getting the financing, I mean, to write the business plan, to write a 75-page business plan, to go to the banks. We ended up going to 4 different banks, and only one said yes to the terms we needed. We ended up borrowing a total of $10 million, including actually $8 million plus a $2 million line of credit, so a total of 10. And
was a $2 million line of credit, was that to help with cash flow and the other incidentals of starting a company?
Yeah, because we didn't have any sales, so we knew that first startup we're gonna have a lot of cash eaten up in accounts receivable and inventory. Mm-hmm. And as well as just ramping up. So we're making payments on trucks and plants and weren't up to full capacity. So the banking was tough. I mean, it was literally just it was like a marathon run at a sprint race speed the whole way. It was every day. Talking to bankers, trying to convince them of what we needed and what we had, and our business plan was workable. But at the same time, we had, I had to find the right people, and I wouldn't necessarily advise this exact way you ought to do things, but because I had been at that company, my previous employer, for 15 years and essentially ran it, I ended up taking about 24 of those people out of the company, and in my mind, took the 24 best. And we tried to hire 5 of the managers senior managers that worked for me there, and end up with 3 of them. But at all these turns, there was some no-go situations. I mean, frankly, if I only got 2 out of those 5 instead of 3, I'm not sure I would have done what I did. If we didn't get all 10 million borrowed, I'm not sure exactly what that would have looked like, because our 3 plants were configured in a certain way in the market to make sure it covered essentially all of the city of Cincinnati. And then there was a piece where, even with suppliers, I got a tremendous amount of pushback, particularly from my previous employer, who didn't want me in business, and he threatening suppliers, cement suppliers, aggregate suppliers, fuel suppliers, tire suppliers, you name it. And say, if you do business with him, I'll never buy another cent from you. And say, there's a lot of pressure going on to get suppliers just to sell you something, and to say something on credit, which they don't really know you have credit. But so I can tell you, there was about a 3-month stretch where I was probably working 100 hours a week, and a lot of the nights I'd sit on the floor at my coffee table, pounding out the business plan and reconfiguring it, and trying to get on the phone, trying to convince people to come work for me, trying to get people to buy from us, trying to get people to sell to us. It was crazy. It was, looking back on it, it seemed like a lot of fun. I don't ever want to do it again.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, that part's fascinating. I always tell people, chase experience, not money. And you think about just the career that you had. You had the expertise, you had the banking relationships, which there's a lot of value. Any successful companies that have a good banking relationship, to carry them through, because there is going to be the ups and downs. But even, as you mentioned, to start a company, to be able to go and have the education and know how to create a 75-page business plan, and then have, the expertise to sit down with the bank and say, I'm confident I need the $8 million for the plants and equipment, these new trucks, and I need the $2 million cash flow as I'm bringing in, 24 new people, 3 to 5 managers that I need. These are key components. And then, the strategy, as you mentioned, I was going to ask you why the 3 plants. And it makes sense that if you're trying to cover certain ground in Cincinnati, as you mentioned, the shelf life of concrete is 90 minutes. So you have to be positioned in 3 separate areas of the big city. That way it allows you, more capacity for sales and projects, right?
Right. And another big piece is, if you would, I remember when I started the company, I'd had a number of friends or relatives say, why don't you just buy 1 plant, 10 trucks? And, the problem with that is 1 plant does not have a backup plant. And plants either break or go down, or they have a mishap in the supply of raw materials, or they have that big car accident, that leads to the interstate from where the plant has to drive to deliver all of its concrete, those kind of things. So it's almost impossible to be a successful concrete company with 1 plant. And then, the 3, because of the size of Cincinnati, a good sized city, not huge, but a good sized city, it was a matter of making sure that if you were going to go sell like a major commercial contractor in that market, that they wouldn't be worried that, he can't serve this job and that job. He can only do 1 job at a time, or he can only do a job in this corner of the city, but he can't help me over here. And so it's tougher to develop a relationship with those contractors when they don't really see you as a full service, particularly geographically type supplier. So it made sense overall in the long run. It created obviously a bigger target on financing that we had to hit, as well as people and all the other logistics. So,
and as far as the scope of work, I mean, did you mostly focus on commercial? Was residential involved?
We were probably almost always say 90%, 80-90% commercial industrial. We did a little bit of residential because it fills out the schedule. The commercial guys tend to want to go early in the morning. The residential guys tend to want to go in the afternoon. So we really just did it to make sure we were utilizing capacity. But for the most part, we were commercial industrial. That's where we hung our hat. That's where we made our reputation.
And so explain, you start with 3 plants, you start with your, the 45 trucks as you're working. And then at some point, came the opportunity that we mentioned earlier where it's like, okay, let's think outside the box and do something that's a little bit different. We may have a remote facility for a large company that's not in the city of Cincinnati. So we can set up a temp plant or, remote plants. So, what was the complexity of starting up remote plants in other areas? And then how quick did you get those up and running?
So it started on a pretty small scale. So actually, I'm going to tell another story about kind of blindly running into something. But you're either just going to think I'm a really lucky guy, or you're going to think that we figured out stuff.
Hard work, Lisa, luck. And anyone listening, I mean, as I interrupt you here, but when you think about starting a new venture, and if you have, that 90 days working 100 hours where you're borrowing $10 million and you have, 25 people coming on board, I mean, that is a major risk. That's a major venture. I mean, this is not something that's so much lucky as it is. It's targeted, but there's hard work behind it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I've always said you make your own luck, and I think most people understand what that means. But on the golf course, I'd always rather be lucky than good. But
always,
most of the rest of the time, I'm going to figure out how to make our own luck. But how it actually started was we had one of our plants was on the Ohio River near downtown Cincinnati. And we ordered 3 of the exact same plants. They were conventional plants that sit on big foundations and high up in the air. And we got to the site down on the river, and we did the soil tests and found that the foundation was going to cost more than the plant itself because it was all next to the river and fill and crap. And so we stopped and said, wait a minute, we can't do that. It's not in the plan. And we went and talked to a different type of plant manufacturer and worked with them and came up with a plant that was essentially a mobile plant that was meant to be towed around the country and put up quick. And it cost a little bit more money, but it didn't cost as much as its foundation. So we bought that plant, and we got some experience and saw what it could do, and was kind of impressed with it. And then about a year in, we had an opportunity to do a big, about 1.5 million square foot warehouse, Walmart warehouse, with a contractor who said, we just don't like the local guy. It's about 2 hours outside of the market we were in at the time, around Cincinnati. And the contractor said, we just don't trust the local guy that bid it. Do you want to take a look at it? And again, we're kind of starting out. I said, yeah, sure, we'll take a look at it. And we went out and looked at it. And it actually required 2 plants on site. And we figured out how to do it, bid it with a little extra money in it. Thought if we're going to do it, we need to make a little extra money, and actually got that job, which meant we bought 2 more plants, 2 more of these mobile plants. And that was our first mobile job. And from there, it kind of, we continued to look at, I'd call them, just bigger, harder, more challenging mobile jobs where we would be adding different types of equipment or different expertise within our company. And it became then a significant part of our business. It was something that was actually, we called it our national division. So we started out headquartered in Cincinnati with 3 plants, and our mobile division, our national division, we did business, Brad, you're in Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
So we did, there's about a 2 million square foot Target warehouse in Tucson we did.
Wow.
What are we doing in Tucson, Arizona? A little guy from Cincinnati, but it was another one of those things where, the local guys didn't necessarily want it, or it didn't fit. Or they were concerned about mostly about the production schedule at the time, which was going to be, for those of you, in the construction industry, there were about 2,000 cubic yard pours in the middle of the night, every night. And so the local guys are like, we don't want to do that. We got our regular business. And so that was typical of our early opportunities where we were doing big warehouse, big huge pours. But it eventually worked into where we were doing much tighter, harder spec jobs, and we end up doing a lot of work under FAA specs or Corps of Engineer specs. We did the Bristol Motor Speedway, where those are some of the steepest bank turns on a racetrack. You got to figure out a way to keep concrete on a whatever it is, a 32-degree banking. I mean, the banking, I went out there. I remember when we went to that job the first time, I was on the infield of the track, and you'd stand in those corners. And I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6'5", and I got long arms, but I'd stand at the bottom of those turns and put my arm out in front of me and just lean forward a little bit and touch the curve, touch the track above me. I mean, those are the kind of things that were just a lot of fun and drove us to seek those things out, or to go ahead and look at those opportunities, mostly because we were always making profits that were, 2.5 times what we'd make at home. So it was lucrative.
It's interesting because I think for anyone listening, when you talk about a 2,000 cubic yard pour, I mean, it's 230 trucks, right? Roughly. I mean, it's quite a bit. And so when you look at, a need in the industry, as you're bringing value to your customer base, which is what we need to do as business owners, is that you're looking, hey, there's a need, there's a gap in the industry, if you will, for someone that has the capability to know how to come in and perform for a continuous 250 truck pour, and be able to set up a remote plant where now I have the materials and access, and I can hit that schedule. The customer's going to look at that and even say, Jim, I'm willing to pay a little bit more because I know you can perform, right? There's value there for me because I'm investing a lot in this Target facility and, this Walmart warehouse. And so I need someone that I know is going to live up to it, because at the end of the day, these are companies that are performing off of liquidated damages. I have a lot of peers that build for Walmart and Target. And so I know the the damages that are involved in these projects if they don't hit the timeline, because there's a lot of, all their shipping and manufacturing is leaving these facilities. And so there's a lot of responsibility. And that's why, for someone such as you, Jim, that sees that gap in the market, you can come in and now conquer that and really provide value to them. Yeah,
absolutely. And it was, we were, in hard bid contracting work, it often comes down to the dollar, but I think we won all ties, and we would oftentimes get a little bit of a premium, mostly just because on those mobile jobs out of town, we always told them, we're dedicated to you. You're our only customer. We're not taking on additional work. And oftentimes we're able to put a plant, directly right on site. We did the Indianapolis Colts Stadium in Indianapolis, and Indianapolis is a big town, has a lot of big producers, a lot of really good concrete producers. But in that case, we bid that job, and we put the plant literally right next, within 100 feet of where the stadium was being built. And we said, we're yours. You got everything you want. Brad, if you order a job that needs 5 truckloads, and then there's the 6th one to finish off the job, and the concrete plant's across town and it's rush hour,
you're in trouble.
You got a whole crew sitting there. You got a pump and a whole crew. You're spending, who knows how much. Maybe it's, on a commercial pour, maybe you're spending, $800 to $1,000 an hour. And then you've got a product quality issue. And, when you've got a plant, 100 feet away, that's a pretty big advantage. I think a lot of people saw that, not just from a delivery standpoint, but from a quality and freshness standpoint as well.
So how many, do you recall offhand how many remote plants you had built and constructed, throughout your tenure?
So we had, most of the time we had a 6-plant fleet that was dedicated for the mobile work. And we typically would do 2 or 3 jobs a year. Usually didn't have more than 2 going on at once. And so amongst that fleet of plants, we took them all over the country. And like I said, we were out west. We were in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Wyoming, quite a bit, all of those states. And then as far south as Texas, Florida, Georgia, up through Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania. So a little bit all over the place. But we were, because we were willing to travel and we had a decent fleet of plants, we were able to stay as busy as we wanted to be.
And I think what's key is, for you to be able to expand and have remote plants and have this consistency, right, in not only manufacturing, but also in your brand, right, in your reputation, and have that, that same culture on a remote plant as you do here in house, at your main facility. And I know you speak about it in your book, and you've spoken about, using, for sake of a better term, an Excel spreadsheet to rank the leadership, rank the training, rank, the ability of each of your employees and staff members. So explain the value. I mean, how did you evaluate each management member or member of your team on a spreadsheet so that you can understand their capability, their drive, their ambition?
Sure. And this is, I got to give credit to an organization called Aileron that was founded by Clay Mattiel, who was the CEO of Iams Pet Foods before it was bought out by Procter & Gamble. And Aileron essentially helps with management and leadership of small and medium-sized businesses. And in one of the courses for the president that they have, they talked about this, and I started using it pretty religiously in my own business. But it was when you're growing, it's trying to make sure that you figure out what kind of capacity you have in your management. And so, for instance, you're trying to figure out, in plain terms, you're trying to figure out if your operations manager can go to the next level as the vice president of operations, and can your vice president of operations go to the next level as COO. And to do that, what I ended up doing was creating spreadsheets just for each manager, and it was not something that I did, in an annual review with them or anything. It was just for my own internal sake. But I was looking for their strengths, their weaknesses, where I needed to fill in, whether it was with additional training or additional education or anything like that, and then kind of just give them a general rating. So I knew it was on a 1 to 5 basis of, is this somebody that's excelling at their present position? And then the big thing was the potential. Do they have the potential to move up to that next level? And at least then I had an idea in my own mind, spread out in front of me in black and white, instead of just sitting back in my chair thinking my guys are pretty good or they need help. You have in your mind, where do I have some strengths? Where do I have some capacities? Where do I need to find some help? And it was a pretty big assistance for me, anyways, when we started looking at these things where we'd have a big jump, just like we talked about that 10-day job where I had to triple the size of the company. There was, at times we had some mobile work going on that required us to double the size of the company for a year, but then possibly go back down to nothing, to baseline, the next year. So it was really critical to that. And by the way, the other thing I did try and do, I tried to do it to myself a little bit, because as smart as we all think we are, if you sit down and kind of rationally think that, well, if I'm really doubling the size of the business for the year, I'm going to spend X amount of time doing this. And by the way, I'm half-time COO, so where am I creating gaps for my own company? Because of the either lack of bandwidth or maybe even just lack of knowledge. It was a good tool for me.
Yeah, I love the thought there to evaluate yourself. How important is that to really self-reflect and see, how am I doing as a manager, as a leader in my company? So for you, Jim, I mean, looking at this as yourself, I mean, what did you realize was the most effective time for you as a business owner? What did you spend most of your time doing? And what should, company owners, really focus on as the owner of the company?
Yeah, for my size company, we end up, kind of fluctuating between about 120 and 200 employees, depending on that mobile work, and kind of steady state of about 50 million in sales, just to give you an idea. And so for that size company, unfortunately, I still probably did a little bit of all the C-suite jobs. CEO, COO, CFO, and but for the most part, I think what I tried to not do is do stuff that I was good at and comfortable at, and tried to make sure I was doing the right thing, which is go find those gaps, go find those places that need some assistance, and try and jump into those places. And so, just to give you an idea, I don't think I'm a natural salesman. But I know I can close deals. I know I can talk to owners and usually come up with the right side of the sale. but I'm not particularly good at it, and I don't particularly like it. And but I knew when I had to do that, and I'd try and jump in there. And the same thing happened, in each area at one time or another. I'm probably more of a pure operations guy. I mean, I would go out and do operations all day, every day, just because I love that kind of stuff. But you got to be smart enough to go where you're needed, not where you want to go.
100%. I mean, you need to understand where you're needed, and also you have to understand, as well as you mentioned, you know what you're good at, and you know what you're great at. Spend the time you're great at, and hire other people that you're good at, and let them be great, right? And it allows them to now hit their wheelhouse and really achieve what they need to. And going back to that spreadsheet, Jim, as you're looking at employees and you're rating them, and you're thinking, okay, well, X, Y, and Z, they're great at this. I feel that maybe they're good at VP of operations. Are they ready to take that jump, to CEO? So at some point, though, you also have to look at this and say, I may not need to hire within. I may need to outside hire, right? I need to bring someone in. How can that affect just the overall culture and dynamic of the company when someone may or may not be promoted, and now you're bringing someone else in, who you think may be a good fit for the company?
Yeah, it's tough. I was always a little extra sensitive to culture fit. And you can hire a brilliant guy. You can hire somebody that was super successful, at his role. And if he's not a good culture fit, it can be disastrous because you'll lose everybody that works for him. Maybe they won't quit, but you'll lose them kind of internally, and you'll lose that extra 10-20% that you used to get out of them every day. And so that was always a huge challenge. And I got to admit that, I probably, batted a solid 500 in that area. So, I mean, made my share of whoops, I shouldn't have hired that guy kind of thing. And the only thing I can say is, just keep the old adage in mind of hire slow, fire fast. So, if you make a mistake, just don't linger and don't let it fester.
That's one of my favorite theories, I should say. I know Disney lives by that. You hire slow, fire fast, because morale is everything, right? It's going to motivate your people. And what I love in the book too, you speak about the bullseye. Of course, that's the name of it, but you mentioned that when you're hiring and you're looking, what does it mean to know your bullseye? Because it's one thing to have a vision or have a target, but you're very specific on what that should be.
Yeah, I used to. So throughout the book, I talk about a bullseye, and mostly because throughout my career and my business in particular, there was a lot of kind of emphasis and reinforcement of what exactly is our goal, and don't let there be what's typical like mission creep or settling for this is okay, this is it's still good, we're still positive, we're still in the black or whatever it might be, but in particular, just making sure that there was always a focus on, am I still aiming at the original bullseye? Is the arrow traveling towards that bullseye, or am I starting to get off path here? And so oftentimes, particularly, the folks that work for me, they're more engaged in day-to-day activities. And sometimes, that it's easy to get distracted. And, it's the difference between, working in your business and working on your business. And at my level, if I wasn't working on the business more than in it, and by that, what I mean is, everybody has meetings they got to do. Everybody has papers they got to sign, contracts they got to review, and, go check on some work and go sign, payroll, whatever it is. That's when you're working in your business. But if you're not working on your business and making sure you're traveling towards that bullseye, you're gonna experience some drift. And you think that maybe that only cost me a couple percentage points in profit. But if you're in construction, you're just thankful you're not in the grocery business, because our margins aren't much better. And, you can't afford a couple points here and there, because, a couple points here and there leads to a couple more points and a couple more points. And I think that's how we always were able to maintain really almost best in industry profit margins, just because I think of that focus.
I love that counsel, because, when the analogy of the the grocery business, the restaurant business, us in construction, there's slim margins, right? And a couple of mistakes. And if you're not focused on that bullseye or at least understand, as a company that you should be spending maybe 10% of your time, maybe 20%, whatever that is, on the company, not within the company, as you mentioned. And to be very targeted as far as, looking at our systems, looking at, sales, looking at, efficiency, and do we have the right people in the right place, and training, and all these things that will allow us now as a company to be so much stronger, as we pursue these new ventures and new goals that someone such as yourself, Jim, may have.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these things we all learn the hard way, unfortunately. But I know that, for the most part, it was me learning that first, but it was also making sure that all my direct reports kind of caught on to that part of our culture, is that we are serious about our bullseye, and we are persistent in making sure that we're aimed there and that we are tracking to hit it. And again, so often you can take in our case, you would take a plant that has good margins, and then they slowly start to erode, and maybe you start to lose a little market share, but you're still making money, and you'll get caught up in, well, that's okay, we're still making money. Or you'll get caught up in, we should have gone up 5% in sales, we only went up 0.5%, and you start losing that focus. And if you and particularly your folks aren't very much attuned to how important it is to stay focused on that bullseye, because that's where, whatever it is, that's where maximum profit margins are, maximum capacity is, maximum quality, whatever it is that cause you to establish that bullseye. If you're not focused on getting there, you're going to start to lose. And I've seen lots of companies actually go broke because they lose that focus.
And I love that you shared that, with a targeted bullseye, it doesn't mean you have to be very specific, with a goal in your company that you have to do one thing. I mean, you can still be diversified, as you mentioned. You could have the core, 3-plant system where you're working in the Cincinnati area, but you can also have a bullseye and a target in our remote plants. We're going to go work in Tucson. We're going to go work in New Mexico and other areas of the country, but still have a bullseye, still have a target, and understand we're diversified so we can cater to different clients, but we're still going to be targeted in each specific area, so that we really are very clear with what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's in every part of our business too. I mean, I can remember talking with, with our controller about receivables, and we talk about what's our DSO, our days sales outstanding, and we'd have a target for that. And let's just as an example, let's say, unfortunately in the supplier business, let's say our DSO was 50 days, and I said we want to get to 40. And by the end of the year, he's at 48. Well, he improved. And then the next year, he's at 46. Well, he improved. Well, if our company didn't have that culture of staying focused on a bullseye, a lot of times you'd say, well, he's doing better. That's okay. He's making progress, but he's not getting there. And we had that everywhere. We had that in every piece of the business where, if we established that target, we wanted everybody stayed focused, and the resources behind it, and also the accountability in place for the manager that was responsible for that area. So,
and I love that you focus on relationships, because the reality is in construction and design, manufacturing, whatever it is, it's a relationship industry, right? And even as much as you could have these refined systems and you focus on the business and you've grown, from 99, 2000, companies growing, you're doing incredible things, open up a new markets, the recession hits, right? I mean, 2006 to really 2008 is when it really hit, but we lived through that. I lived through that. I know you did, so explain just the value of that banker relationship, because even as many refined systems as you have, when that comes up, if you don't have close ties to your banker, which we're accountable to them, I mean, that's the reality. I mean, how did that help carry you through, those tough times, 12, 13 years ago?
Yeah. I've seen so many companies where their relationship with their bank has just turned on a dime, and they feel like they've been blindsided, and all of a sudden, they're on the outs somehow and being have more onerous restrictions on what they can and can't do. And I know from the beginning with our company, our relationship with our banks was a personal relationship, and I made sure that I didn't know just the guy that called on me, but I knew his boss and his boss's boss, whether it was just a lunch or two, or, or whether I'd spend more extended time with them. But it was always, it still came down to a personal relationship with the folks you're dealing with, not just the bank. And there's only one time where that didn't hold up for me, is where a bank got burnt in our industry by a number of other companies, and they decided to exit the industry. And we lost one of our major banking relationships that way. But every other banking relationship we had, it always carried through because of that personal relationship. And why that personal relationship was valued was a couple of things. One is that I made sure that our business plan and any forecasts we gave them were realistic, and also that we were dead set and committed to hitting it or exceeding it. And so, I can't say we never disappointed a banker, based on a forecast, but it was damn rare. And so making sure that our communications were realistic about what we thought we could do, and we were always getting there. And then the other thing was just being transparent with them, as things changed or things happened, was making sure that, you'd have those conversations with them, rather than, get to the end of the year and they ask for a financial statement and you didn't tell them it was going to be different than what they thought it was going to be, kind of thing. And so, it's not really different than any other important relationship you have, in business, or, for that matter, in life. Being open, honest, transparent makes a big deal. And for the most part, that probably kept our long-term banks, with us through those tougher times.
Yeah, I love that you share that, because there's two aspects to that relationship, right? There's the financial bank account, which we understand, right? There's the dollars in, dollars out. And there's the emotional bank account, right? The emotional deposits that you're putting in before you're needing that debit or credit out. And, you think about in the recession where, Jim, if you have a strong business plan, if you're communicating that, if you're living up to it, the reputation, the transparency, and you communicate with your bank, not only are you financially doing your part of those investments and deposits, but you're also emotionally doing that. And so when the script changes, when the recession hits, and now you need help from that bank, well, that emotional relationship's been built, that credibility's been built, where they say, you know what, we may have 10 contractors that we're working with, but Jim is number one because we understand who he is, his organization, his word, his bond, everything else. And now we may allow some things to, draw out a little bit, hold some rates, hold debts, extend them, whatever it may be, to help carry you through, because you're a known entity to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that case where that our one banking relationship, the bank was a large national bank, decided to exit our industry. The local banker, the local president, came to me, and he was not happy that this was the case. He said he couldn't do anything about it, and he said we're gonna give you as much time as you need. He said I'll make sure you get a couple of years if you need it. And then he made suggestions and a couple of introductions of who he thought would be good fits for us for that portion of our banking that we were going to need to replace him with. And so that was a big deal, because I think he went way beyond probably what he was supposed to do, just to try and help us when his arms were tied. But that was definitely because of the relationship we had.
Yeah, which is so key. And your part of the country is different than mine. I know in Arizona, it's a right to work state. It's a little bit different. We do have some union shops. It's not to the extent of other parts of the country, maybe California, or Illinois, Northeast, and so forth. But, what are some of the pros and cons of owning a private company as opposed to a union company?
I don't think there are any pros to owning a union company. I mean, and I don't mean to be harsh or anti-union about it, but the only thing I can see mostly in the construction industry is there are some jobs that you're required to be union, and so that gives you an advantage to being pre-qualified, so to speak, for that type of work. But I've worked with unions and worked without unions, and there's to me there's no advantages to it. There's no every once in a while you read in the paper, it's usually a European automotive company will say they are seeking to bring a union in or let a union in, and I think that's insane. I don't know if they're just saying that for some reason, but the only thing that unions bring usually is maybe a little bit of balance to an extremely poorly run or manipulative company towards their employees, but there's no benefit to it.
Well, I love that term because I mean, reality is if you're a great business owner and you believe in your people and you invest in them, that's the value, right? That they see. You're allowed a little bit more flexibility there. Whereas, union, the mentality behind it is, hey, we're gonna, if you have a manipulative owner or someone that's taking advantage of you, you're right, that's the intent there. But so how, with a company such as big as yours, and how you're working in these different markets and for different vendors. How were you able to, I don't want to say combat, but at least be able to keep your firm private?
Well, actually, the interesting thing is with my previous employer before I started my own company, when I started working at that company, they were 100% union. And when I left, they were 100% non-union. And to me, if you're going to be competitive, if you're going to be a successful business in this world today, you better have a good relationship with your employees. You better be striving to be the employer of choice in your market, in your industry. And if you're not, you've got a lot bigger problems than just a union coming in trying to get you to pay better wages and benefits. It's got to be a big red flag if a union comes into your non-union company and wants to organize your workers. It's essentially telling you screwed up. You need to do something different, and you need to develop a relationship where you're treating your employees. To me, the most important things are fair and consistent. And that's what most people are looking for. They'd love all the other stuff, to be motivated and have a nice place and air conditioning and stereo or whatever else it is. Those kind of things are nice, but most people want to be treated fair and consistent. And unions are around to make sure that when companies aren't doing that maybe there's some protection or maybe an alternative. But for the most part, if you're doing your job as an employer and you really actually want to be a successful company, which means you're treating your employees not just fairly and consistently, but you're making it a place where they want to come to work, where they're motivated, where they're part of a team, where they understand your mission, where they're contributing to it. Those are the kind of places that people want to work at, and those are the kind of places that unions have no place for.
Yeah, I love that counsel. I mean, any business owner listening, and it doesn't matter what your business is, if you're fair and consistent with your employees and you have clear, SOP, clear scope of work for them, they're going to be able to really find joy in their employment. And that's just with access to information now, with technology, everything else. I mean, it's so different nowadays to really research and understand the firm you're going to work for. And in your case, Jim, here you are building this company. You tried to acquire one, you didn't. We spoke about, the venture of going off as an entrepreneur and building this incredible company and working, all throughout the country. Did you have an exit strategy? I mean, was that always the intent? How did that come to fruition that you decided, hey, we've built this amazing company, it's time to hand it off to the next one?
Yeah, I would say for the first 5 years after I started the company, I wasn't thinking about any exit, anything. I was for a while you're just thinking about surviving, and then you're thinking about growing, and then you're thinking about making lots of money and those kind of things. I was not thinking about selling. I started the company when I was 36 years old. So although I would also counsel that age shouldn't make a difference in that. In the process of thinking about exit strategy, but sometime soon thereafter, as I got more active in the industry and we looked at some acquisitions and made a few, I started looking at a little bit longer term, and mostly to the point that as most owners are of small and medium businesses, your business is probably the majority of your net worth. Mm-hmm. There's probably a ton of people out there that it's virtually 100% if you exclude your house. And so, I started really trying to take a little bit of an objective look at it, because I think one of the problems most owners of small businesses have is they're going to run their business till they think it's time to retire. So if you live in Ohio and you own a business, you're going to run your business until you retire and move to Florida, which is what we all are supposed to do. And that's a terrible thing. It's a terrible idea to think if it'd be like if you're sitting here with 100 shares of a stock, is to say I'm going to sell it when I'm 65 years old. I mean, nobody does that, right? You're going to sell it when you think it's reached a high. I mean, that would be the most important thing. You buy low, you sell high. And so it's absolutely insane to think that you're going to sell the largest asset, maybe up to 100% of your net worth, based on how you feel about you're getting old, you want to do other things, you want to retire, you want to go play with the grandkids. That's insane. And so as I looked at that kind of objectively, I started saying, well, what is my business worth? And tried to, for a couple of reasons, but tried to keep tracking that so that I was maybe a little bit better aware of what this biggest asset in my portfolio was doing. Was it doing well? Was it doing good? Was it doing bad? And it's not always up to how I was running the company. It had a lot to do with the market, it had something to do with the economy. And wanted to make sure that I didn't, the worst thing would be for anybody to get to, whatever age it is and decide to sell and it's in the middle of a recession, which you have no control over. Or you get, we all are going to get sick or we're going to die sometime. And, maybe you have some sort of yourself or a close family member or your spouse has a life-threatening health issue. And you can't work or you don't want to work because of that, and that shouldn't be the reason you decide to sell your company. You ought to be wanting to sell when it's high, right? No matter when that was. And if I look back on it, 36 years old, I started the company. I should have started looking at that, the year after I started it, maybe, because I should have tried to figure out what kind of return have I gotten? What's the value of the company? Is it high now or is it low now? And make a decision based on that. It ought to be a little more objective than the emotional, subjective way we usually look at it, or a lot of people do.
Well, the emotional side is realistic. You put your heart and soul into something and you work so much time and see it grow and see it flourish. And, but I love that counsel as far as understand the valuation. Every company should be looking at their valuation on a regular basis, right? Because you need to understand what the market is going to dictate for the value of your company. And whether in your case we have brick and mortar and equipment behind you, as well as production and sales. I mean, these are all things that flow into that valuation, and understanding that, well, now that's going to allow you to really look at that when the time presents itself, as it did for you, Jim, where you can look at this and say, yeah, this is time. I understand the valuation there. Now it can allow me to pursue other ventures, right? I'm still young and have a lot to do. And this is interesting too, because if I'm not mistaken, without getting too political, but you dabbled in politics a little bit, right? You actually decided to run, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. There was a bout of temporary insanity I dealt with. And,
yeah. What would ever pursue, construction's hard enough. Anyone listening, construction, design, architecture, it is a tough industry. And now you want to dabble in politics. So I think you took that complication to a whole new level.
Yeah. So far you've painted me as kind of a smart guy, and now I'm going to take a sudden turn. Yeah, well, just to tell you the brief story, it was 2016, wasn't that long ago, and Speaker John Boehner retired. It's kind of a funny story. I don't know if you remember, but the Pope visited the Capitol, and Boehner's Catholic, and that was an emotional day, and he probably was facing some strong leakage of support from Freedom Caucus and Tea Parties, and was losing a little bit of his previous authority to, I guess, create policy within the Republican Party, let alone the Congress. Anyways, he retired, and that left an open seat, and that's pretty rare in Congress almost anywhere. And that particular district is where my office was and where I probably spent the majority of my waking hours for the prior 25 years, and essentially got a look at who was running, and it was a bunch of career politicians. It was a bunch of career Ohio politicians lining up for the same job, for their next job. And I couldn't believe there wasn't a businessman or, somebody else, an outsider essentially. And that all those things came to influence me, along with friends and family, that I ought to throw my hat in the ring. And so I ran.
And how was that, just dealing with the complexity of running for politics and, everything that goes with that?
It's a totally different world. I thought construction was an odd place to spend your life, but politics is definitely worse. The campaigning was something I couldn't, I kind of thought I knew what it was going to be like. It was much worse. It's much harder. It's a terrible thing to try and run for Congress. But it's obviously some people like to do it, and what I did discover was, while I thought I could step back from my business and honestly, I wanted to do something for our country, and I thought I had some good ideas and could be an effective member of Congress. What unfortunately I found was that, people get elected because of money, essentially. And there was the guy that won got a lot of outside money came in from super PACs from all over the country, and he raised a ton of money, raised more money than the three of us that finished second, third, and fourth behind him put together, and took the office. And so I wish him well, but it's certainly that whole experience was almost incredible, and it's so incredible. In fact, I'm in the middle of writing a book about it, and I think it's tentatively titled "I Ran for Congress and Lost, Thank God."
well, it's a tough climate. It doesn't matter what side of the ledger you're on. Politics is always tough, and we're grateful for those that do it. And grateful for our military. I mean, all those that do that for us. But business is hard enough, I think, for most of us. And I love that you've spent that time as a business owner, Jim. Throughout your career of building your company, building your firm, looking at the valuations. Building just careers for your team and your employees. And now, the next chapter where you're looking at becoming an author. Well, you are an author, right? You already have your book that was just released. We mentioned you have another one upcoming. And so now you're looking to give back to the community, to us, so that we, in our generation could be better business owners based on the experience you've given. So what's upcoming and exciting for you, Jim, outside of that book that you're going to be working on next?
I really am excited about the Business Bullseye release. And Brad, I wrote the book because I have been, a lifelong reader of business books, and I've probably read every major book that's come out in the last 30 years. And there's been some great ones, but what I felt was missing was a book that was honestly, written by somebody like me for my peers, for other people that started their own business, run their own business. And sorry about that. Oh, and okay. I really felt like that was a missing a book out there that would really just talk about how do you start and successfully run, and then the full cycle, eventually selling your business for a good price if you're a small to medium sized business. And I also wanted to you said you've read the book, and I also wanted to, I hope, put some stories in there that are, that not only kind of illuminate the few points I'm trying to make about how to run a good business, but also maybe even entertain people, make it a candid, accessible read that isn't too heavy. So I'm hoping that's going to help. Along those lines of, I have some speaking engagements that are kind of related to this whole topic, and also do some CEO advisory type engagements where, rather than just being on the board of a company, actually have a couple engagements where I'm essentially just an advisor, particularly with some smaller and really some decent-sized, medium-sized businesses, where occasionally you want somebody, I hate to say it, but to talk to, that's been in your position. Instead of maybe talking to your board if you have one, or talking to your wife or accountant or lawyer, sometimes you want to talk to the exact guy like you. And I tell people, being somebody that started his own company and runs his own company, that's a club. And, it's not that big a club, but we all know, when you meet somebody else that is like that, that's done that, you kind of recognize, the same membership in that club. So.
Yeah. And I can appreciate that. I mean, as a business owner myself in construction, which is a tough industry, and that club is very difficult, on a daily basis. And you can understand that. And that's why the book resonated with me. And I highly recommend. We're going to have the book in our show notes. We'll have it in our post here, with the link to Amazon to purchase that. And, can't thank you enough, Jim, for making time for us today and sharing your valuable insight. And where can our listeners find you?
Probably the easiest place is the website is jimspurlino.com. But you can find me at LinkedIn and Facebook as well. And I really appreciate it, Brad. It's always good talking to another member of the club.
Oh, it is. Yeah. We could share war stories all day for sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.